November 15th, 2025. Darkness still blanketed the Caribbean Sea when the radar aboard the USS Gerald R. Ford suddenly lit up. A pair of faint, fast, low-flying, silent contacts were approaching from the southwest. They were Venezuelan F-16 A Block 15S, Cold War-era fighters flying just 120 feet above the water. Caracas had ordered them to do one thing: locate and intimidate a U.S. destroyer supposedly drifting in disputed waters. But what they found was not a destroyer. It was CVN-78, the most advanced aircraft carrier on Earth. Without warning, one of the Venezuelan jets fired a burst of 34 tracer rounds, stitching the sea only inches from the hull of the American carrier. It was an act of escalation that triggered every sensor and weapon system inside Carrier Strike Group 2. Instantly, the United States launched two F-18E Super Hornets, roaring into the fight. Would Venezuela's outdated F-16s have any chance of piercing the steel defenses of America's most advanced warship? Or would that reckless strike ignite a swift and devastating U.S. counterattack? Let's uncover the truth. 4:12 a.m., November 15th, 2025. On the frozen runway of El Libertador Air Base, two Venezuelan F-16 A Fighting Falcons, nearly 40-year-old airframes, trembled under the pressure of a single roaring engine. Despite their age, each jet had cost the Venezuelan government over $22 million in maintenance and upgrades, and each could climb from 0 to 28,000 feet, about 8,560 meters, in under 3 minutes. Tonight, they were not performing a training mission. They were flying blindly into a mistake. According to the command brief, their target was a small American destroyer named Echo 7, roughly 9,000 tons, supposedly drifting in disputed waters. But the intelligence packet had been transmitted 18 hours earlier, an eternity at sea. No one mentioned that a U.S. carrier strike group could shift 30 to 45 nautical miles overnight, completely rewriting the tactical map. At 4:19 a.m., Captain Luis Herrera and Lieutenant Carlos Mejia took off, their F-16s consuming 22,000 pounds of fuel per hour as they accelerated east. They dropped to 160 feet above the Caribbean Sea, an altitude where a single wave could slap the underside of the aircraft in 0.3 seconds, but low-altitude flight meant staying beneath the reach of U.S. radar. At least, that was the plan. For the first 20 miles, everything looked normal. Calm sea, clean radar, no American reaction. Then, at 37 nautical miles, Mejia's AN/APG-66 radar began to pick up the impossible. A return 12 times larger than a destroyer, a thermal signature stretching nearly 330 meters. A moving mass equivalent to 100,000 tons of steel. Luis, "That's not Echo 7, he said, voice tightening. The silhouette in their sights was not a destroyer. It was the USS Gerald R. Ford CVN-78, a U.S. nuclear-powered supercarrier hauling 70 strike aircraft, shielded by 6 escort warships, and capable of erasing any threat in under 15 seconds, and 2 aging Venezuelan F-16s were flying straight into it. 05:01 a.m. Just as the Venezuelan F-16s dropped to 120 feet above the waves, the entire battlefield snapped into focus. Captain Herrera's radar, an aging AN/APG-66 built in the 1980s, struggled to process the returning echoes. Instead of a compact 9,000-ton destroyer, his scope now displayed a radar cross-section the size of an 18-story building laid on its side, a steel mass over 330 meters long. Something so massive the display nearly spilled outside its frame. But Herrera had no time to question it. Caracas wanted footage. A close pass. A warning run. Something bold enough for morning television. So he pushed the throttle forward. The F-16 surged to 510 knots, its Pratt & Whitney engine roaring with 14,900 pounds of thrust. The jet skimmed through the humid Caribbean air, low enough for sea spray to kiss the landing gear doors. 5:05 a.m. Herrera squeezed the trigger for exactly 1.2 seconds, spraying 34 tracer rounds into the water. Just a burst. Just intimidation. But on the American side, the reaction was immediate. At 5:10 a.m., every ship in Carrier Strike Group 2 registered the maneuver. Alarms erupted across the strike group. Missile doors opened, weapons officers took their stations. The USS Gridley went into full combat escalation. CRAM launchers rotated, tracking the V-shaped flight path of the Venezuelan jet. The Phalanx CIWS, firing up to 4,500 rounds per minute, spun up, its barrels glowing dimly in the pre-dawn dark. The SPY-1D radar locked onto the F-16 with such precision that operators could see micro-movements in the aircraft's wings. Above them, two FA-18E Super Hornets had already launched, dropping from 5,000 feet to intercept. The Super Hornets rolled inverted, diving at Mach 0.95, locking onto both F-16s from 1.9 miles away, a distance so close that a missile would need only 6 seconds to hit. Herrera saw the lock, heard the warning tone, felt the cockpit tremble as American fighters painted him with advanced fire control radar. He realized too late that Echo 7 had never been a destroyer. He had just fired a warning burst at a $7.5 billion nuclear aircraft carrier, protected by enough firepower to erase his jet before he could even blink. The sky tightened. Every radar screamed. Every trigger finger hovered. One more second, one more spark, and the Caribbean would erupt into war. 05:11 a.m. The Caribbean sky shifted from darkness to steel gray as two FA-18E Super Hornets that had just launched from the deck of the Eisenhower dropped to low altitude. The distance between them and the two Venezuelan F-16s had shrunk to 2.1 miles, far too close for any mistake. From the flight deck, the air control team confirmed. Hostile jets descending to 120 feet. Rules of engagement shifting. Stand by for counterforce. The two FA-18Es were carrying 4 AIM-120D, 2 AIM-9X, and the ANASQ-228 targeting system. Each could lock onto a target at 160 kilometers. But today, they didn't need range, they needed pressure, forcing the Venezuelans to back off or slip up. Below them, Herrera felt the airframe shake harder by the minute. The F-16's RWR warning system emitted a long, sharp, piercing tone. The United States is locking on. Red lights flashed. High priority threat. 3 o'clock. Missile lock. The Americans did not fire, but they tightened the angles. The two Super Hornets inverted at 5,100 feet, then dove at Mach 0.96, generating enough compression force to throw the Venezuelan radar sensors off by 0.7 degrees, a tiny number, but enough to break the weak lock of the F-16s. 05:14 a.m., USS Gridley and USS John Finn shifted to Combat Level 3. CRAM rotated a full 360 degrees, locking firmly onto both F-16s. One wrong directional move, even a mistake, and CRAM could launch 5 missiles at Mach 2.5, hitting the targets in 4 to 5 seconds. The entire carrier group switched to CEC, Cooperative Engagement Capability. 6 ships, 28 radars, 42 antennas, 1 combat brain, processing 1.8 million signals per second. It left the two F-16s exposed, naked, over the sea. 05:15 a.m. Super Hornet number 204, locked onto Mejia's F-16 from 1.6 miles. At that range, if the U.S. pulled the trigger, an AIM-9X would reach its target in 3.9 seconds. Inside the F-16 cockpit, the air thickened. Herrera shouted over the radio, "Carlos, brake left now!" But the Americans had already cut off the escape path. Super Hornet 211 dove in from the right, forming a tightening pincer. 05:17 a.m. The Pentagon transmitted a command code to USS Gridley. DEFCON Air Level 2, non-lethal dominance authorized, meaning the U.S. would not fire, but would crush the opponent's will, forcing an unconditional retreat. USS Gridley fired 2 MAC-58 marker flares, creating a 900-meter column of fire, a burning line across the Caribbean. Cross 1 more nautical mile, and this becomes war. 5:18 a.m. The two Super Hornets screamed past the noses of the two F-16s at a distance of only 190 meters, so close that a deviation of just 3 degrees would cause a mid-air collision. Wind roared against the canopy like metal being cut. Radar lock tones blared non-stop. and the Venezuelan pilots understood they were no longer the hunters, they were prey surrounded by the steel predators of the United States Navy. 5:19 a.m. The Caribbean sky cracked open with a long metallic shriek, the sound signaling that the patience of the U.S. Navy had reached its limit. After 18 minutes of non-lethal suppression, the two F-16s still held their course, still trying to maintain a no-retreat posture to report back to Caracas. But in warfare, a single millisecond can change everything. From the deck of USS Gridley, the RIM 116B CRAM received its first command of the morning. Weapons hot, tracking priority, F-16-1. The sensors rotated 72 degrees left, hard locking onto Herrera's F-16. Less than 0.6 seconds later, a 2.8-meter CRAM missile launched at Mach 2.4, tearing through the air like a blade fired straight into the sky. Herrera heard only one sound. Missile inbound. 2 seconds to impact. 2 seconds. No time to think. No time to pray. He yanked the control stick. The F-16 rolled 74 degrees left, pulling G-forces that nearly exceeded the wing structure limits. The white exhaust plume from CRAM grazed past at only 41 meters from the cockpit, close enough to peel paint off the right wing. But today, the United States was not going to miss twice 05:20 a.m. The two Super Hornets, already in perfect encirclement, shifted from warning to combat termination. Pilot of aircraft 211 dropped to 310 feet, locking onto Mejia's F-16 at 1.4 miles. On the HUD, the indicator was clear. AIM-9X, 98% probability of kill. Mejia knew exactly what that number meant. He had trained with the AIM-9X since academy days and had never seen it miss at under 2 miles 05:21 a.m. Super Hornet 211 fired. A white spear of light shot forward like a plasma javelin, leaving the launch rail at 1,600 kilometers per hour, then accelerating to Mach 2 in 1.3 seconds. It locked onto the target via infrared seeker, following the heat of the F-16's engine, the only hot object against the Blue Sea. Mejia attempted an escape maneuver, a Cobra Split S, nose down, rolling over, diving toward the surface. But the F-16 was a 1980s design. Its control system responded 34% slower than that of an F-18. He couldn't outrun fate. The AIM-9X hit at 27 meters above the waves, detonating with the compression force of 9 kilograms of PBX-112 explosive. Fire ballooned into a sphere, slicing the F-16 in half like a hot blade through foil. Mejia's biometric signal vanished from the CEC network in 0.04 seconds. Herrera saw only a flash, then a column of black smoke. 5:22 a.m. Inside the remaining F-16, oxygen levels dropped as the backup systems overloaded. Herrera screamed, his voice shaking like compressed metal. "I'm hit! Carlos is gone! I'm disengaging! Disengaging!" But the United States does not stop when the enemy begins to run. That is the rule of close-range carrier warfare. The threat must be neutralized completely. The two Super Hornets banked, reacquiring Herrera at 1.8 miles, with a projected kill time of 6 seconds. The Caribbean was entering the moment where one more decision would turn the incident into a full-scale regional war. 05:22 a.m. The explosion of the second F-16 was still echoing across the water when every sensor in Carrier Strike Group 2 simultaneously switched to target remaining high risk. One threat was still alive and desperately searching for an escape. Herrera, the last F-16 pilot, banked hard and tried climbing to 600 feet, but the F-100P JU-200 engine was overheating after the high-intensity maneuvers. The OVHT warning light blinked like a failing heartbeat. Over the radio, his voice cracked. "This is Falcon 2. I'm disengaging. I repeat." But the Americans did not respond. Not because they didn't hear him, but because every combat subsystem had entered an automatic kill priority mode if the target showed any climb, acceleration, or heading change. 05:23 a.m. On USS Gridley, The SPY-1D fire control system built a glowing red data mesh around the F-16. Radar precision at that moment reached 0.004 degrees, equivalent to tracking a metal coin from 23 kilometers away. This was no longer monitoring. This was a countdown to elimination. The two Super Hornets tightened their circle. Distance, 1.8 miles, 1.7, 1.6. On the American pilot's HUD, the line appeared. Aim 120D. Time to impact, 6 seconds. 6 seconds. 6 seconds to decide peace or war. 5:24 a.m. Inside the USS Gerald R. Ford combat room, Captain Mark Dalton watched every parameter. Herrera's speed, altitude, flight angle. Any deviation beyond plus or minus 9 degrees was classified as a pre-attack maneuver. Any acceleration above 0.3 g was defined as an immediate threat. On the CIC main screen, the F-16 icon flickered yellow, then red. It was accelerating. Not much, only 11 knots. But for the U.S. Automatic Threat Identification System, that was enough to trigger a Level 1 missile launch condition. Two weapons officers called out in unison. Target escalating. Request permission to fire. No one in the CIC said another word. No one breathed loudly. The entire 333-meter ship sank into silence like a metal monument awaiting judgment. 5:24 a.m. Super Hornet pilot 211 felt the tension in the control stick ease. The auto-fire system was preparing to take over. The armed light turned on. Target lock shifted to solid red. 05:24:33. A single sound filled Herrera's cockpit. Missile alert! Terminal phase inbound. He understood. This was the final warning before everything turned into metallic dust. He screamed into the radio, his voice cracking like shattered glass. "I'm breaking off! No weapons, no weapons! I'm climbing out of the zone!" He pulled the stick, pushed the F-16 up to 1,200 feet, shut down all radar illumination systems, and dropped speed to 290 knots, dangerously low for a fighter aircraft. In the CIC, the red icon shifted to orange, then blue. The American pilot exhaled. The auto-launch system canceled the firing sequence. The AIM 120D froze its countdown at 3 seconds. A regional war had just been avoided because one pilot chose to let go of the trigger. 5:25 a.m. The Super Hornets drifted to both sides, escorting the Venezuelan pilot out of U.S. waters at a monitoring distance of 2.4 miles. No one spoke. No one smiled. That silence sometimes is the victory, on a morning when death was only 3 seconds away. 05:26 a.m. The sun had barely lifted above the Caribbean when the first political shockwave detonated. As the surviving Venezuelan F-16 limped westward under American escort, encrypted channels across the region crackled awake. Bogota, Brasilia, Havana, Washington, every capital understood instantly. Something had gone catastrophically wrong at sea. By 5:40 a.m., USS Gerald R. Ford had already uploaded the initial CEC combat log. 19.2 gigabytes of radar tracks, thermal trails, weapon system triggers, and cockpit audio. Within minutes, it reached the Pentagon and the White House Situation Room. Analysts didn't even need to zoom in. The data told a brutal, simple truth. The Venezuelan jets had fired first, descended to strike altitude, and refused all radio warnings. But in Caracas, the truth was treated like an intruder. 6:10 a.m., President Arsenio Navarro appeared on national television, voice controlled but trembling beneath the surface. Two of our brave pilots were attacked without provocation by an American carrier. We demand international condemnation. Venezuela will not be intimidated. 2 words sent the region spiraling: attacked and provocation. The surviving pilot, Herrera, was still airborne when he heard it. His breathing quickened. The narrative was being forged before he even touched the ground. At 6:15 a.m., Colombia issued the first emergency advisory, placing its northern radar network on alert level Bravo. Brazil followed at 6:22. The Dominican Republic and Trinidad locked down civilian air corridors. For the first time in 17 years, The Caribbean basin saw simultaneous activation of 3 overlapping early warning grids, a defensive posture used only when nations fear a cascading regional conflict. 7 a.m. The CIA station in Bogotá transmitted a rapid assessment. Probability of Venezuelan military escalation within 72 hours, 54%. Too high. Far too high. The Pentagon convened an emergency joint threat board at 7:20 a.m. The first presentation was a frame-by-frame reconstruction. The room fell silent as analysts displayed the exact moment Mejia's F-16 fired its 1.2-second burst and the precise timestamps showing CRAM's near strike at 5:19:24. Then came the most dangerous slide, projected Venezuelan public reaction. The model, based on previous crises, predicted violent protests, military mobilization, and domestic pressure that could push Caracas toward retaliation, whether rational or not. Meanwhile, the White House crafted an official statement, but word choice became a battlefield. One wrong verb could ignite the hemisphere. One misplaced adjective could embarrass an ally. One sentence could force war planners to rewrite the next 6 months. By 8 a.m., the global news cycle exploded. U.S. shoots down Venezuelan fighter jet. Buenos Aires. Dogfight over the Caribbean. London. American carrier provokes incident. Havana, F-16 down region on edge. Washington truth evaporated beneath headlines. Fear filled the gaps. And deep inside the carrier strike group, every sailor understood the real battle, the political one, had just begun. By 9:30 a.m., the crisis had outgrown the Caribbean. It entered the world's largest courtroom, the United Nations. Before the session even began, U.S. Ambassador Catherine Riley walked into the chamber with a black case the size of a brief projector. Inside it, classified, timestamp synchronized, CEC telemetry, declassified for 1 day only. Venezuela's ambassador Sebastián Rojas arrived moments later. His speech was already being broadcast across Spanish-language networks. The narrative was simple. America attacked 2 unarmed pilots conducting a maritime patrol. But the U.S. delegation came prepared with steel, data, and science. 10:14 a.m. The meeting opened. Venezuela spoke first. Rojas raised his voice, pointing dramatically as cameras flashed. Our pilots followed international air protocols. The United States violated sovereignty, international law, and the safety of neutral airspace. The chamber murmured. Several non-aligned nations nodded momentum, for a moment swung toward Caracas. Then Ambassador Riley pressed a button. The lights dimmed. CEC system logs filled the screens. Frame by frame, radar tracks materialized, not the polished graphics seen on news channels, but raw system data. The altitude drops, the 1.2-second burst, the pincer formation of Super Hornets, the 900-meter MHEC 58 warning line, the red escalation flag triggered at +11 knots. Then the recording that sealed the room's silence, the cockpit capture. I'm hit! Carlos is gone, I'm disengaging! Disengaging! Everyone understood what that meant. He was fleeing, not attacking. Riley spoke only 13 words. These are not opinions. These are machine-verified combat records. The effect was immediate. Diplomats shifted, notes were scribbled. Defense attachés whispered into secure phones. Then came the most devastating presentation. Infrared footage of Mejia's F-16 firing its warning burst at 5:05 a.m. 18 ambassadors froze. One visibly gasped. The entire Venezuelan claim collapsed under thermographic evidence. But the U.S. did not seek humiliation. They sought prevention. Riley ended with the line that would be quoted for years. War is often born from minutes of confusion and days of pride. We ask this body to choose clarity over pride. It worked, partially. The UN did not condemn Venezuela, but neither did it condemn the U.S. Instead, it issued a rare dual-censure warning. Escalating military miscalculations in the Caribbean posed a regional stability threat. Outside, the media spun the day into a hurricane. Inside, strategists understood. Diplomacy had bought time, but not safety. While the world debated in New York, Venezuela burned politically. When Herrera landed at 11:32 a.m., ground crews filmed his F-16 from multiple angles, panels scorched, intake vents charred, oxygen line ruptures. Every image contradicted the official government narrative. But the regime needed a hero and a story. So by noon, state-controlled media declared Herrera a defender of sovereignty, while quietly erasing every technical detail. Then came the unexpected blow, 12:40 p.m. Leaked footage from naval radar stations showed the Venezuelan command had been using 18-hour-old intelligence of fatal negligence in maritime warfare. The footage went viral. Military bloggers, opposition figures, even former generals attacked the government online. They sent pilots into a trap with outdated data. This was not bravery, this was incompetence. Families of active duty airmen began protesting outside Fort Tiuna. The hashtag Justicia para Mejia trended across Caracas for 6 straight hours. Inside the Air Force High Command, fractures deepened. Some generals demanded a confrontation with the U.S. to restore honor. Others warned a full war would end in national ruin within days. By 2 p.m., President Navarro convened his Security Council. The transcript later leaked. "We cannot appear weak. We cannot fight a carrier group. We cannot admit fault. We cannot survive the truth." Meanwhile, the United States Navy released high-definition flight path overlays showing how close the region came to catastrophe. One screenshot highlighting the 3-second window between peace and war. The map stunned military academies worldwide. By evening, the political ground under Caracas was splitting. The Air Force blamed naval intelligence. Naval intelligence blamed the Defense Ministry. The Defense Ministry blamed foreign manipulation. Citizens blamed everyone. And in the middle of it all sat the image that would define the crisis. The lone F-16, climbing to safety at 290 knots, surrender lights on, chased by 2 American Super Hornets ensuring he survived the escort. For many Venezuelans, this was not humiliation. It was a reminder that war nearly took their sons. When the last Venezuelan F-16 vanished beyond the edge of American waters, the Caribbean finally exhaled. The sea looked calm again, the horizon softening under the first hints of daylight. But everyone inside Carrier Strike Group 2 knew the truth. They had just survived the kind of mourning that entire regions are lost to. Nothing in the gentle waves revealed how close the hemisphere had come to a firestorm. But in the minds of the sailors who watched red threat indicators flare across their screens, or the pilots who heard the final missile tones, one fact echoed like a heartbeat. War had stopped with only 3 seconds to spare. For the United States Navy, the morning became a testament to a different kind of power, the kind that holds rather than strikes. Every American system, from CRAM to CEC to the Super Hornets tightening their pincer, proved decisive dominance. They had complete control of the battle space. They could have fired with zero doubt about the outcome. Yet the greatest demonstration of strength they gave the world was restraint. They chose clarity over anger, precision over pride, and stability over the easy temptation of overwhelming force. It was a kind of power that does not roar but hums. Steady, measured, unmistakably confident. On the other side of the sky, Captain Luis Herrera faced the most human moment of the entire crisis. His jet was failing, his oxygen was dropping, his sensors were collapsing one by one, but he made the choice that saved thousands of lives across a dozen cities. He disengaged no bravado, no last gesture, no political theater. Just a pilot who realized that surviving, not escalating, was the only sane path left. His final climb to 1,200 feet, his shutdown of emitters, his desperate drop to 290 knots. These were not signs of defeat. They were signs of clarity. In a world drowning in pride, Herrera chose reason. Hours later, diplomats would argue, governments would spin narratives, headlines would ignite across continents. But none of the political noise changed the truth written in radar tracks and cockpit audio. The world narrowly avoided a war triggered by outdated intelligence, mistaken assumptions, and human pressure inside 2 cramped cockpits. It was not technology alone that prevented catastrophe. It was not doctrine. It was not the United Nations. It was the people, American and Venezuelan, who chose not to let one mistake define the fate of millions. In the end, The most powerful moment of the entire crisis came not from missiles or machines, but from silence. The silence of the AIM-120D countdown freezing at 3 seconds. The silence of 2 Super Hornets easing into escort formation instead of attack formation. The silence of a damaged F-16 retreating towards safety instead of disaster. That silence became the victory. Quiet, fragile, and far more valuable than any explosion. History will remember this morning not for how close it came to war, but for how deliberately it stepped back from the edge. And in that small, vanishing space where restraint defeated pride, the Caribbean kept its sunrise.